I joke with my kids that, back in the 2000s, I was the founding CTO of a .com company. And they're like, oh, what was the idea? I'm like, well, it was Facebook. Like, wow, you invented, you had that idea. It's like lots of people had the idea. There were dozens and dozens of startups at the time. There only became one Facebook and then other social media companies to follow. The point is that the ones that win are about execution.
Welcome back to Neuroconvergent Leadership, where we talk about effective communication and leadership, especially in the STEM workplace. I'm Jeremy Doran, and I love to help great engineers become great leaders. Today, we have a special guest with us. We have Mark Palmer. Mark is a Chief Product Officer, AI advisor, and he's a prolific writer. He was also named a tech pioneer who will change your life by Time Magazine. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
How did that come about? Time Magazine declared that.
Yeah, it's a weird one. It was when I was running a company called Streambase about 15 years ago. We won this award with the World Economic Forum of being a tech pioneer. Time Magazine picked that up and personalized it about me changing people's lives. But I like to think of it as it was cool technology that was invented by Dr. Mike Stonebreaker, Richard Tibbetts, Eddie Galvez out of MIT. So we hopefully we all changed a little corner of the tech universe. But yeah, that's how that came about.
Nice. So can you explain what a chief product officer is?
Chief product officer's job is to set product direction, to understand the market, understand customers, and then fuse that with what engineers can and like to build to hopefully come up with products that add some value. So I think the chief product officer, I've also been a CEO, is really the CEO of a product. And I think it's one of the coolest jobs in tech if you kind of bridge the human and tech side of both of what it takes to build software products.
Great. Do you do that for one company, or is that something various companies bring you in for?
Yeah, so now I advise companies. I'm on several boards. I work with a small handful of companies that I advise from a product strategy perspective. I also work with Warburg Pincus to analyze companies to acquire, which includes kind of acting as a chief product officer to understand where they fit in the market and what the potential is for growth, how AI is going to impact that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't no longer work with one product. I kind of cut across a number of a portfolio of companies I work with.
And what size companies are they typically that you're doing that work with?
Yeah, from little tiny A-round startups, which is sort of one of the more fun stages where you're still trying to figure out like what the product market fit really is, all the way up to $1 billion plus companies. I was an executive at a company called Tipco, which I sold that company Streambase to and stayed there and ran about 7 or 8 different product lines. So that was $1 billion company. So sort of everything in between, which is pretty, I think, unique point of view. A lot of times people kind of hover in the startup world or hover in the big company world, and there's very, very big differences between those.
And having worked in and or talked to people at companies that grow fast, especially technology companies, there's often a point where there's a change in leadership because it takes one type of leadership in the beginning and then that continually changes. Can you share what you've seen in terms of what leadership is required at the very beginning and then as things grow?
Yeah, it's a great question. I often would say things like there are people that are they're $5 million company people, there's $50 million company people, and there's $5 billion company people. Each kind of has a different profile. There's a really good book by a guy named Gifford Pinchot from the 80s, actually, that actually broke down the difference between a real entrepreneurial mindset and somebody that works well in a big company. But it really boils down to maybe the easiest way to think about it is early stage people tend to be risk takers, love to thrive in ambiguity where the product isn't even known yet. The customers don't even know what they need yet. So that's the kind of the invention phase. And that goes all the way up to, gosh, you're $1 billion company, and how do I become, Pinchot's term for this is an entrepreneur. So somebody that is an entrepreneur within a larger company. And that's a very similar skill set, but it becomes more about also bringing other people in parallel along with you. So the skills are very, very different. The skills of an early stage company or investor is really more about instinct, creativity, thriving in ambiguity. Working in a larger company tends to bring on a lot of, some people think of as management headaches. Again, Pinchot's term, I think, was the corporate corporate antibodies, resistance to change. So it's really about a style of management that you need to have. And certain big companies are better at facilitating that than others. Startups, by definition, there's kind of no rules. It's a Wild West. But big companies tend to react to that kind of leadership and management differently.
And I imagine that at least early on, a lot of the leaders are very technical people because they're the ones who kind of generated and built the products.
Yeah, that tends to be very true. In fact, actually, when I joined Streambase, this company that I was the CEO of, as the original founding team had gone through this transition of, kind of inventing and building the product, and that tends to be the technical leadership phase, and then going to market. So I have a technical background, but I also spent a lot of time in sales, technical pre-sales, product management, leadership in various forms. And when a company gets to a certain size, generally that's maps to the way venture capitalists think of investing, like A, B, C rounds. C rounds and above tend to be the ones that are for scaling, and that means go to market. So a lot of times that's the transition that happens when so the ideas, the product is defined and has some resonance in the market, and then it's time to step on the pedal and go. So a lot of times that's like the big area of a leadership transition, which tends to require a different kind of mentality. A little bit more on the sales and marketing and finance, running the business side than the invention of the technology.
So you are an interesting combination of having started with a technical background, but then moving into both sales and leadership roles. That's not an easy transition for many technical people. I'm curious of how your journey went and how you see that journey in people at the startups or companies that you work at.
Yeah, it's a interesting question. I think everybody is very different, but I went to school to be a programmer up in New England, like I know you are now. I went to the University of Connecticut. I spent the first 5 years of my career doing C++ programming. I wasn't a very good programmer, so at least in terms of myself, my own expectations, I was very athletic. I played a lot of sports when I was a kid, so I wanted to be the best. I wasn't the best programmer. I actually went to something called Johnson O'Connor aptitude testing up in Boston, actually, and they identify core elements of somebody's aptitudes that don't change. The theory is that they're in you from birth and you can't change them. So, for example, some people have an intelligence or an aptitude for understanding music, right? You can't learn that. It's sort of something that's built into your DNA. And I did this testing, and they came out and they said, okay, it's like a 2-day testing thing, and it was this really weird set of arcane tests, and they came out, and it was incredible. They kind of knew me better than I knew myself. And they suggested 3 areas for me to be: an entrepreneur, number 1, a leader, or a cartoonist, which was really weird because I had never been a cartoonist. And it took me a while to figure that one out, but that has to do, I think, with where I finally gravitated to, in terms of leadership, which is about storytelling, setting direction, influencing other people, the way they think, and being creative in that endeavor. So that sparked me to take a job in pre-sales. I loved it. I took off. I was always very, very good. I loved that role. So I really found my fit. And then that, of course, also triggered, those sort of skills you need for sales, I think, are very similar to the ones you need to manage people, right? So influencing them instead of buying a product to, sort of pursue a vision, pursue a passion. So eventually I started managing people, then being a CEO and doing various management positions. So, but that was how the transition was when I found out that, there was this other thing I could do with my technical background other than writing code. And I turned out I had an aptitude for it, which not everybody does. So I think there's really, I've seen a lot of people not make that transition, and that's okay, right? But there are a lot. I know that's the context of your podcast here. So I think there are really a lot of things to think about if you do want to try to make that transition.
Yeah, I just did a podcast on the 80-20 rule. 20% of inputs generate 80% of outputs much of the time. And I also relay that to where you're going to focus. So if there are 10 things you could focus on, but there are 2 that are important and they really fit your strengths, that's where you should spend your time, on the things that you're naturally going to be good at, and make those things even better. And then find a team that can support you in the other 8 things.
For sure. I mean, that's how CEOs have to operate. The higher you go, I think, in the management chain, the more leverage you get to delegate tasks. But love that 80-20 role. And I think when you become a leader, you really do have to take that seriously. Like, what is that other 80%? It's storytelling. It's how to manage people. It's about how to set OKRs and objectives effectively. It's understanding the business side, the implications of what you're trying to do. So those are very different tasks than, learning how to debug C++ code.
Yeah.
The 80% has more to do, I think, with people, storytelling, and communication, obviously.
It starts with the understanding yourself, though. I've seen a lot of people who were not natural leaders become good at leadership, but they may just do it in a different way than someone else.
Yeah.
So identifying where you are going to be good and where you're going to need help is crucial.
Yeah, one of my best lessons in that was in high school with a basketball team, right? I was the point guard, but I only could dribble with my right hand. I had a terrible left hand. I watched some tape back later and realized that I was really, really horrible, in going left. But what was really cool, we had like one of those sort of experiences where the little team went all the way to the quarterfinals of the Massachusetts like basketball fight. But what we actually were, it was a really good team. We had one guy that was a really good shooter. We all played pretty good defense. There was like that mix, and then designing a system and a team to use each one of those skills. I think of that. I always lean on those kind of experience, team sports, for how to craft a team, even as a first line manager or as a CEO, or even from a board point of view. The same sort of ideas work.
Nice. You've mentioned storytelling a couple of times. So why don't you tell us a little bit more of your thoughts of storytelling and why you find it so important?
Well, this podcast talks a lot about this. I think people respond to story. This isn't an opinion. I've studied a lot of neuroscience and behavioral economics, and it's just a fact. People pay attention more when you tell stories. It's kind of why, like, I instinctively go back to like telling stories about basketball. Like, if people are listening to this, maybe they started to tune in when they heard, well, what's happening next? What happens next? What happens next? So number one, it's just the best way to communicate ideas, and especially in a complex field like STEM, where the ideas are really complicated. So if you're designing, designing drugs, or new software products, or artificial intelligence, for sure, people just are not going to be able to grok those ideas really simply. So yeah, story is the key. It's also why people buy things. It's why they're influenced to make behavior change. So again, that's why I think sales was a really good learning ground for that, is to really tell a story about what the products are going to do for you. Jobs was so brilliant because he told us it wasn't about, it was a phone, right? But his idea, the story he would tell, was about how it really amplifies human creativity and wisdom and intelligence, right? So that's something that people, respond to, not, hey, it's got a number of megabytes and a screen, although we talked about that as well. But really it was more about the story of why the product mattered and how it helped people out. So yeah, I think that's probably the most important, but also in a lot of cases underlooked skills that leaders have to develop, which is how to communicate. And you do a lot of speaking, I know. So this is, you're preaching to the choir. Yeah, it's one of the things that I would definitely assign some of that 80% effort to, is learning how to be a good storyteller.
And it's interesting. I've talked many times about how most engineers want to give you all of the detail, and most executives want the briefest, what do you need from me, without all the details. Yeah. And making that transition can really be a challenge, I've found, for a lot of engineers, to lead with the small thing you need and just have the details waiting if they're asked for.
Yeah, put it on a bumper sticker. One of my favorite exercises is the 6-word story, the famous one by Hemingway, right? For sale, baby shoes never worn, right? Like, that's like sort of the first one. But like this is one of the areas where it's really great to use AI as a storytelling partner to try to get your main idea across as concisely as possible. But great advice. The problem is it's hard, right? The problem is it's hard to do. It means having a lot of empathy, practice. One of the first, when I took that first sales job, my sales leader there sent me immediately to Dale Carnegie training, where
Yes.
every week I had to stand up and tell a story. And it could be a story about what I have for breakfast, but I had to try to make it interesting. And one of the best things I ever did, because it started to get me into that mode of, okay, this is how it works. And seeing other people struggle with the same thing, even very senior people, was really helpful. So so it's all about.
Yeah, I took that same class, and the scariest and best week was when you had no idea what the story was going to be about. You got up on stage, they gave you a word, and you just had to start talking.
Yep. After that, it's easy to explain something you already know well and are prepared
Yep.
for in theory, but it's really not. But it does make it. I think the exercise is to make it personal and make it sincere and authentic, and people will care and people will respond to it.
This is slightly off topic, but similar. So I've been doing improv for a number of years now. And in improv, it's kind of that same exercise. Someone says something, and that's the reality, and you have to just go with that. But it's a great exercise for really listening and paying attention and reacting to what the other person said, which so often we have preset number of things we're going to say, and people lose the ability to really listen to what the other person's saying and genuinely respond to that.
Yeah, no, improv is a great way to think about communication. I've not trained in it, although now you're getting me inspired to do this.
Yeah, it's fun. I think you'll like it. What are some other things you've seen at companies as they grow that the people in the company need to adapt to in order to become effective?
Well, when companies grow specifically, new people come in. And one of my favorite sayings is that people have their best opinions the 30 days they join a company and the 10 days before they leave it, because that's when they come in with all the ideas. I mean, to your point, right? It's hard to sort of absorb companies as they scale. New ideas remain faithful to the original founding idea, but also change, because that's why you bring new people in to affect change. So one of my favorite anecdotes about this was Lou Gerstner, one of the IBM's CEO, long time back, took over IBM, and everybody wanted to know, okay, what's the strategy change? What are you going to do? What are you going to do differently? And he's like, nothing. I'm going to go on the road for 6 months, and I'm going to listen to customers. I'm going to listen to our employees. And then ask me in 6 months, and I'll start to have an opinion. And I really love that way of thinking about engaging in a new company, and also bringing on new people to the team is taking the time not to put too much pressure on, and actually kind of eliminating that, like the first 30 days of you're really brilliant, because you're actually not yet, because you don't really understand the company and the complexities and the hard things. So I think spending the time is something that some companies miss when they bring new people in. And then over time, co-creating objective key results, OKRs, which I'm a big fan of, to set up some goals and realistic targets for things that you're actually going to do, but set those collaboratively, not just sort of handed down from the CEO, but really discussed, debated, crafted, and agreed upon, that align with some overall goals. So those are I think some of the challenges of growing with new leaders, and some of the ways that I think of making it better.
One thing that we talk about on this podcast a lot is asking questions, and it shows some level of vulnerability or admitting that you don't know. But it's what it takes to be a really good leader, in my opinion. And some people just can't get themselves to admit that they don't know a thing. And so they will just talk instead of listen, because they want to show that they know.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, in fact, I would argue, because I wasn't such a good programmer, it made me have to ask stupid questions, which turned out to be a powerful thing.
Yeah.
But look, it's not just a simple observation either. Albert Einstein in the Notes wrote that the formulation of the question is actually more important than the answer. He ascribed great credit to Galileo from 300 years prior about the observations he made about his theory of relativity. So, I mean, and what he specifically credited was the questions that Galileo posed, not necessarily the answers, because he posed, in his estimation, the right questions, but it just took 300 years to come up with the answer. So I always found that to be a great example of like if Einstein thinks the questions are more important than the answers, then that's a pretty good endorsement. And also just the time it takes. They're really come around to insight based on a good question.
And going back to growing a company, you mentioned the strategy. How much of it is coming up with the right strategy and how much of it is coming up with the right culture and developing the right culture?
So, one of my other favorite sayings is that strategy without execution is hallucination.
Nice.
So I always got to, a lot of times I'll review people's profiles as they're looking for new jobs or stuff. And particularly for people that wound up in strategic positions in big companies, they'll say, oh, I'm a strategy person. I'm like, no, that's, number one, the strategy, in some ways it's the easy part, right? I joke with my kids that, back in the 2000s, I was the founding CTO of a .com company. And they're like, oh, what was the idea? I'm like, well, it was Facebook. Like, wow, you invented, you had that idea. It's like lots of people had the idea. There were dozens and dozens of startups at the time. There only became one Facebook and then other social media companies to follow. The point is that the ones that win are about execution. And ironically, Zuckerberg is probably the most famous technical founder that managed through those transitions to be CEO. That's the kind of the art of knowing how to grow and build and ask questions. Sometimes with when an engineer thinks, oh, I'm going to become a manager, they think that there's a right answer. Actually, being a leader is about dealing with the ambiguity and not knowing that there's a right answer. So that's culture of asking questions, of being wrong. One of the other great tools I love for this is mock press releases that come from Jeff Bezos at Amazon, right? Writing down, before you start a project, write down the press releases if the product existed, and then have people poke holes in it. So forming a culture around proposing ideas and then collaborating around how they could be better, or how they could be right or wrong. That's a key to culture setting. This process of setting OKRs themselves, objectives and key results, are all about not setting them necessarily at the start, but adjusting them when you get information. And that's why OKRs are so powerful, because the key results are measurable when you do them right. And when you miss the target, then that you have to follow through with a culture of, okay, well, why did we miss it? Is the target too high? Is it the wrong target completely? I mean, these are cultural things that companies, I think every company sets MBOs and OKRs, but OKRs are more important. But I don't think, I see a lot of companies just not manage them as well as they could. So that's another sort of cultural thing that people can change. But it's all about execution. There are strategy things too, like, is our strategy wrong? And of course you have to really check for that. Don't get me wrong. Obviously you have to have a strategy that evolves. It might be not the 80-20 rule. It might be the 99-1 rule, right? You spend 1% of your time setting the strategy, 99% pursuing it, and then, continually adjusting it.
One thing I like to say about planning is not a laser beam. It's more of a flashlight. Like a laser beam would be nice to know 5 years from now exactly what the outcome's going to be. But the further out it is, the more diffuse it is. And sometimes you need to make navigational changes as you're going.
Especially now, we should probably bend that analogy for in the world of AI, right? Because I think the thing that's really maybe the most unique about generative AI and agentic computing, which is going on right now, that people are very aware of, is how compressed the cycles happen. Historically, has been a decade, 20 years, 30 years. ChatGPT rose to more usage in 6 months than it took electricity to get into the same amount of homes back in the 1900s. So 40 years of diffusion of innovation versus 6 months, and now it's far surpassed that. So the speed at which you have to adopt new ideas is I think what's the most interesting thing about AI.
I have not done a great job of adopting AI in my everyday. The one thing that I use it for, and it's pretty helpful, is when I write an article or a blog post, just have it edit and go and tighten up the wording. And so I've found it useful for that, but I know people use it for so much more. But at least
keep going, because there's like it's infinitely deep. I mean, there's a couple quick tips for you. Ask for it to rewrite what you wrote in the style of an author you like.
Interesting.
It's amazing. Ask it to poke holes in the logic of what you wrote. Especially the new reasoning models are amazing. And this has just happened in the last month. The 4.0 model of, so try it again and then ask it to write a haiku or a poem or, yeah, it's use Notebook ML from Google. Have you tried that?
No.
Take what you wrote, load it into Notebook ML and have it generate a podcast. It's amazing. Not as good as this podcast, of course, but it's incredible to hear your ideas played back to you in an audio form, which is another sort of neuroscience tested and true way of really hearing what your ideas in a different format in a multimodal way. Yeah, keep going, keep going. Good that you started. I use it all the time. I use it probably 4 hours a day. Different
Wow.
forms of AI, about 20 different tools.
Cool. It's like having a whole team of people work with you.
It is. And to your point, link it back to giving and getting feedback and checking ideas. One of the things that I think is really powerful is that you could have, like, for example, take an idea and have it play back to you, in the voice or from the perspective of Albert Einstein or something, or Steve Jobs, or pick your favorite person. But the thing is, you could do it in the privacy of your own home or on a train or whatever. There's no, this is one of the hard parts about culture, right? Like everybody says, well, ask for feedback, but that's threatening. But AI is not, right? It doesn't care about hurting your feelings, although they tend to be very, very polite, overly polite to some people, depending on the one you use. Maybe Grok's a little bit more aggressive, but having that ability to get feedback without the sort of the human worry of being judged or on the other side, being afraid to say something and hurt somebody's feelings. You're always in that mode. So the AI is one of that sort of switching of perspectives that you can tell AI to, be harsh, find the things I missed, find the things you love. Because most people, I think, are like you. They've tried it for search or for smaller applications, but these things are transformative.
Nice. I will need to develop my AI skills. Thank you for that. All right.
Well, I would argue you already have the most important one, which is the ability to ask questions.
Thank you.
All this is about being curious about making your ideas more accessible or interesting, or even just hearing them play back to you, or poking the holes in your logic, and certainly learning something new.
Perfect. All right. And we have to start wrapping up. So, Mark, how can people learn more about you and/or reach out?
Just LinkedIn is the best. I also have a Substack. It's called Techno Sapien. I'm very active in those two forums. Not so much on other social media, but those are the best.
All right. Perfect. So to wrap up with the 3 questions, what's a place you've traveled and loved, and a place you have not yet been but want to go?
All right, loved. Just recently, my wife and I went to Dominica in the Caribbean. Now, it wasn't the place that we loved as much. It was a cool island, but that is one of the only places in the world you can swim with sperm whales. And if anybody loves marine life, the ocean, we love to scuba dive, snorkel, everything, and we've seen a lot of cool things. Nothing is even close to seeing, a whale the size of a school bus swim 20 feet away from you. It was really life-altering place I want to go. I love to play golf. Haven't been to Pebble Beach yet. That's on the list. We'll definitely make it there sometime soon, I'm sure, to check out one of my favorite courses.
Who do you think is a great communicator, and why?
So I'm going to give you 3 because people probably might not have heard of these, and I think from different perspectives. First is Edward Tufte. If anyone's a data visualization fan, he's a former professor at Yale, written, I think, Harvard Business Review called one of his first book, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information, one of the most important business books of the century, actually. But to see him speak, he's probably one of the best. He does a whole day presentation with basically no slides. He famously hates PowerPoint, thinks it sucks as a communication vehicle, but he holds your attention for the whole day. One of the best presenters I've ever seen. Hans Rosling is a TED Talk that is probably one of the most watched data visualization talks. And then Sir Ken Robinson, another TED Talk. If you've not seen, he does a TED Talk on, I think one of the ones that really put TED Talks on the map. He does this presentation about education and creativity in schools. Those 3 presenters are smart. They have research to back up what they're talking about, and they're funny. And they're just great storytellers. So I think those are three of my favorites.
Nice. I will look them up. And what is one piece of communication advice we can all benefit from?
Use AI. I mean, there's so many. I think you cover a lot of storytelling advice, communication advice. It's all fantastic. But I think the one novel piece of information or piece of advice, and we've talked about it, is the myriad ways you can use generative AI to improve your communication skills. You know, if you want to do a better presentation, have it write a script for you. You know, I try maybe 100 new prompts every day with different variations, different spins, different switches. If you're doing AI image generation, I'm a huge fan of Midjourney. Just getting it to again, it's back to the question is the key, right? So learning how to prompt and question AI is actually a skill set. That's the one thing I would leave people with is go out there, pick your favorite AI tool and start asking it questions about how to communicate better.
That is perfect. Mark, it has been so great having you here. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's great talking to you. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for listening to Neuroconversant Leadership. If you found this beneficial, can you do me one small favor? It'll be quick, I promise. Can you go and give this podcast a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen before doing anything else? Unless you're driving. If you're driving, then I need you to keep driving. And then when you're done and parked, then go ahead and give me a review, hopefully 5 stars, but whatever you are comfortable honestly giving. Thank you and have a great day.